Network show right here on 910 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Wednesday, July 21st, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. It's been a very, very busy day today. A lot going on. Reviewing the content for today's show and keeping up on news stories that are taking place across the country. On today's show, we're going to continue our discussion dealing with the segregation wall that was built in 1941 in Detroit along the 8 Mile border in northwest Detroit, 8 Mile of Wyoming. We talked about this some on Tuesday's show. There was a huge article from the NBC News, which was done in conjunction with Bridge Detroit, built to keep black from white, And this deals with 80 years after segregation, a segregation wall rose in Detroit. America remains divided. That's not an accident. And it deals with this wall that was built in 1941 to separate Detroit from some of the white suburbs, and is called Burwood Wall, 8 Mile Wall, or Wailing Wall. And this story deals with the segregation of opportunity as well, and how which side of the wall you live on impacts the trajectory of your life as well, and your ability to accumulate wealth also. So we're going to talk about that. Now, this story is also connected to what happened with Detroit City Council on Tuesday, July 20th. Detroit City Council votes in favor of reparations commitment, putting a reparations proposal on the August 3rd ballot, 2021 ballot, here in Detroit. So we're going to discuss that also, We'll talk about that as well, because all this is connected. And the reparations proposal, Detroit City Council has voted in favor of a reparations commitment. It marks the first step toward what advocates view as applying a racial equity framework for Detroit's African-American community. The resolution was approved in just minutes by the Detroit City Council on Tuesday, July 20th. Council President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield presented a 3-page reparations proposal addressing the unfair treatment of African Americans across the country and in Detroit. The document states that African Americans have been consistently and widely impoverished by discriminatory wages in every sector of the economy. The document states that African Americans have been consistently and widely impoverished by discriminatory wages in every sector of the economy, regardless of credentials and experience based on property, income, and wealth advantage. Now, this proposal coming from City Council is directly related to the story that we talked about yesterday, dealing with the wall built in 1941 along part of 8 Mile, the Burwood Wall, 8 Mile, Wyoming area, northwest Detroit, and how this is all tied to segregation of opportunity. Even though you didn't have colored only signs in Detroit, you're still dealing with various forms of segregation. And we talked about the homes that white people owned, where in their deeds, they had what are known as restrictive covenants. And with these restrictive covenants is stated in their deeds, in the deeds to their homes, that they could not sell their homes to non-white people. And this is designed to lock African Americans out of buying these homes and being able to accumulate wealth and generational wealth through home ownership. All right. While at the same time being oftentimes locked out of taking advantage of loans from the Federal Housing Administration, FHA, and getting low interest loans to buy homes that were being built out in the newly formed suburbs in the 1950s and 60s. So we'll talk about this, and then we're going to we'll get into the story that I have not been able to get to the past couple of days, dealing with the New York Draft Riots of July 13th, 1863, that lasted 5 days. The New York Draft Riots began Monday morning, July 13th, 1863, during the Civil War. And these are riots that took place, and they happened in Detroit as well as Boston also. But these took place because you had poor white men who were revolting because they were revolting against the draft to fight in the Civil War. And they were revolting against the Conscription Act of 1863, signed into law by President Abraham Lincoln. And with the Conscription Act of 1863, this instituted the draft, and it made all male citizens between ages 20 and 35 and all unmarried men between ages 35 and 45 subjected to military duty. However, wealthy white men could buy their way out of being drafted into the military to go fight in the Civil War by hiring a substitute to go fight in the war for them, or by paying a $300 fine. Now, the $300 fine would be the equivalent to roughly $5,800 today, and the $300 fine was the yearly salary of the average American worker back in 1863. So you had this riot that took place in New York for 5 days. And these white men are attacking federal property and attacking federal buildings. They are burning businesses. They're killing African Americans, lynching African Americans. And there's hundreds of people that are going to be killed in this 5-day riot. We're going to talk about this also on today's show as well. And I'll give you more information about the new exciting online course that starts up Saturday, July 24th, that I'm teaching, 10-week online course that I'm teaching Saturday, July 4th, 2021, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, 1865 to 1968. It's a 10-week online course. We have the information at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. And this is going to be a fantastic class. All right. Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We deal with current events and history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, Kemet, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, Kemet, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, to sign up for our email newsletter there as well. Okay. And visit our website, also AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there for the 10-week online course that I teach. And we have the new course starting up Saturday, July 24th, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is from the Civil War to Black Power. Okay, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power. So if you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, scroll down the page, you'll see the information for our radio show. We're here 6 days a week. You can click right here to listen to audio podcasts of this show. We have over 1,000 audio podcasts on Blog Talk Radio, our Blog Talk Radio page. And then we're also on iHeartRadio, CastBox, iTunes. We're on 10 different audio podcast platforms. Click here to read articles that I've written. And we have information for the new 10-week online course from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power. Click here to register. It takes you to the next page. And then click on enroll. As soon as you enroll, you can start watching. We have some archive content you can watch, and you'll be registered for the class that starts up Saturday, July 24th. Okay, I want to go back to, we're going to continue with our topic from yesterday. There's a 14-page extensive article that NBC News did in conjunction with Bridge Detroit. And the name of this piece is Built to Keep Black from White. Built to Keep Black from White. Okay. And this deals with this history of this wall here in Detroit along 8 Mile in Wyoming. Okay. The 8 Mile in Wyoming neighborhood. This was a 6-month investigation by NBC News and Bridge Detroit. Okay, so we talked about this on yesterday's show, so you can go back and watch yesterday's show. We rebroadcast these shows and they're archived on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and also on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Okay, so this expose here, this is from July 19th, 2021. This article came out. They talk about people who are now in their 70s and 80s who still live in the Detroit area, either Detroit or the suburbs, African Americans and white. They talked about Margaret Watson, who as a child in the late 30s, Margaret Watson had seen the new streets laid down like a tic-tac-toe board in the open fields where her father once planted a garden the size of a city block. She knew the streets had to be for white families, not for African-American families like hers. So she was not particularly surprised when in the spring in 1941, a 6-foot-high, 4-inch thick, half-mile long concrete fortification suddenly appeared in her backyard. Okay, so they talk about Margaret Watson, they talk about people like Teresa Moon, and they talk about people who still live in the community. Then it gets to dealing with things like accumulation of wealth and and how people's lives are different depending upon which side of the wall, depending upon all that they lived on. Now, in a 6-month investigation, NBC News and Bridge Detroit discovered that one of Detroit's most prominent families built the wall and developed the adjacent white neighborhood. The reporting also examined the ways this single act of segregation has influenced generations of Detroiters. Now, this story here is connected to the story we'll deal with next, dealing with the city of Detroit approving the reparations resolution to be on the ballot, the August 2021 ballot. Okay. These stories are connected. All right, because this is dealing with repairing the damage, not just of slavery, but a legacy of slavery and decades of segregation and African Americans being locked out of opportunity, even though we didn't have colored only signs here in Detroit. Okay, even though we didn't have colored only signs here in Detroit. Okay, so let's continue here. So the side of the wall these residents called home would later affect the sale price of their houses, the value of their next homes, and eventually the wealth they might inherit from their parents. This ties into intergenerational wealth and being locked out of this and being locked out of being able to take advantage of government programs from the Federal Housing Administration, and how the redlining system, which was created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1937, is used to lock us out of opportunity. Now, their experience in elementary school would determine the classes they took in high school, their decisions about college or the military, and the ease with which they achieved their goals. And throughout their lives, the friendships they made would frame their interactions with classmates and colleagues, with doctors and law enforcement in social settings and in job interviews. We're coming up here on a break. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
910, the Superstation, Detroit's only African-American talk radio.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Wednesday, July 21st, 2021, and we are live. Okay, calling numbers 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Okay, so right before the break, we were talking about I was continuing our discussion from Tuesday's show, and this fantastic article, this fantastic reporting from NBC News in conjunction with Bridge Detroit. And this deals with the segregation wall that was built in 1941 here in Detroit along the 8 Mile border, 8 Mile, Wyoming area. Some people remember the movie 8 Mile about Eminem. Okay, that's the 8 Mile is the border between Detroit and the white suburbs. Built to keep black from white, 80 years after a segregation wall rose in Detroit, America remains divided. That's not an accident. 80 years after a segregation wall rose in Detroit, America remains divided. That's not an accident. Okay. Now, if we continue here with the article, and then we're going to go to that clip one in just a second here, Shakita. So they show, let's see here, they show where the wall is here in Detroit. This is Detroit's Burwood Wall. It slices through the 8 Mile, Wyoming neighborhood just below 8 Mile Road, Detroit's storied northern border. Okay. So it shows Detroit's northern border, which separates Detroit from the suburbs. The concrete barrier runs in an alley behind residents' homes. The east side was originally a black neighborhood. So the east side of the wall is the African-American side. The west side is the white side. Depending upon which side you lived on, determine the trajectory of your life in many cases. The white side was developed for whites only. Okay, now 80 years later, the wall itself now brightly painted in parts with colorful murals, no longer separates black from white. The discriminatory policies that made the wall possible have been outlawed. Nearly all of the area's white residents left for the suburbs decades ago. That's called white flight. Okay, that's called white flight. Crossing nearby 8 Mile Road, which separates Detroit from its suburbs and has long symbolized the region's racial divide. As white families left, they made space for a black neighborhood of affordable homes to flourish. Now, this community, Teresa Moon, 68 years old, who's featured in the clip that we're going to go to in just a minute here. She said this community was such a vibrant community. And she moved to her house just east of the wall in 1959. She said, we were so well connected. We had so much love. All right. I want to go back to this clip here. We shared the first part of it yesterday. Let's go to this clip. This is from NBC News, built to keep, this is a segregation wall has stood in Detroit for 80 years. Residents don't want it taken down. Let's go to this clip.
The wall is directly across the street from my house. I can stand in my front door or in my front living room window, and I can see the wall. One question people always ask me is, do you want the wall to be torn down? No, I don't. The history of what went on, why it went on, and how we can change things, that history needs to be told.
Hey, do me a favor, advance the clip to about the 5-minute mark, and let's pick it up there. Advance the clip to the 5-minute mark. Let's pick it up there. All right. And here's a picture here from this article as well. This is 1941, the Burwood Wall that separated an African-American neighborhood from undeveloped farmland. This is courtesy Detroit News. Okay, let's go back to the clip.
What they did find was that the struggle continued, and that while the restrictions in the South were very direct, the restrictions in the North may be a little more subtle, but they were told that there were places where they could not go, could not live.
Bernice and other activists fought this injustice, writing letters to public officials and lobbying the government until they won access to federal loans and mortgages for the community in 1944. Because of their work, more than 1,500 Black residents bought and built homes in the neighborhood. Among those were Teresa and her family.
It wasn't so much that they were making a point around whether or not they cared, whether or not they had a white neighbor. It was fundamentally that they should have the choice to live where they wanted to live. Her view was that as a Black family, the right thing to do was to give them the opportunity to live in a home. That is just like a basic right.
And in 1948, a Supreme Court case ruled against racially restrictive housing covenants, like the ones that prevented Black families from buying houses west of the wall. But as Black residents began to move in on both sides of the wall, white residents fled to the nearby suburbs. In the decades since, what was once a vibrant Black community was hit hard. The city saw a complex mix of challenges: factory closures, racial tensions, job loss, bankruptcy. Over time, the Black middle class fled the city, and a housing crisis took its toll on 8 Mile, along with the rest of Detroit.
It's changed a lot. A lot of houses are vacant around here, in disrepair. There's a lot of empty spaces, a lot of empty houses. When our family first moved out here, the majority of the people were homeowners. What I learned as being a homeowner, watching my parents and the people in this community, is that you take care of your space. I'm going to the park every day. That's what I do. I want it to remain clean. I want it to be nice. The kids always ask me if I own the park.
You got another corner street?
Yeah, I got one at the house. You want to walk over there with me?
Yeah.
And I just tell the kids, no, it's not mine. It's our park. So you see me picking up trash. If you see trash on the ground, or if you have trash, just go throw it away. Y'all know what to do with that trash, don't you? Do I tell them about the wall? Yes, I do. Do they listen? No. Kids aren't really interested. These kids now are something different.
While other relics of segregation, like Confederate monuments in the South, have been toppled in recent years, many here say they don't want the wall to be torn down.
I think people feel differently about this wall than they do about other symbols because, for one thing, there's a beautiful mural on the wall that depicts something positive. It depicts happiness, togetherness, joy, peace, love, whereas other walls gave a sense of something dark and ugly. Even though the Burwood Wall has that same connotation, the mural on the wall changes your mind a little bit when you look at it.
In February, the National Park Service added the Burwood Wall to the National Register of Historic Places.
I suspect there are stories like this all over the country, and I think increasingly we have to extract their stories. We have to incorporate them into our history books. I think we have to teach kids, give them a sense of place, and you do that by letting them know what's down the block.
Last summer was more than just a reckoning. I think it was an awakening. And the wall, the Burwood Wall, is an example of how far we've come and maybe how far we still have to go.
My son has said to me quite a few times, "Mom, why don't you move?" I don't even see the sense in that. I love living here.
How you doing, baby? Hey, sweetie.
My level of commitment to this neighborhood, there is no way to measure it. I'm not going anywhere. There's nothing that can make me leave. I live and breathe this neighborhood. I do anything for it. Anything.
All right. So that was excellent reporting from NBC News in conjunction with Bridge Detroit. That's this extensive article built to keep black from white. Built to keep black from white. From NBC News, and let's go to the top of it here. Built to keep black from white. 80 years after a segregation wall rose in Detroit, America remains divided. That's not an accident. And when they referenced last summer, they're talking about summer 2020, the protests behind the killing of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter protests, things like this. I want to go, if we go to another part here in the in this article, and we're going to go to clip 2 here in just a minute. 1, 2, look, let's see. This is there's another portion here. The Blackstone development. It talks about the Blackstone development, which was this development about a white developer who puts the who erects the wall to get federal funding. Okay, Blackstone number 6, the super subdivision with the big future guarded close in. Let's look at this here. The 300-acre subdivision has the restrictions that bring demand for home sites surrounded by other high-grade properties. It is guarded from inferior types of buildings. Myers Road, only direct route to River Rouge Industries, runs through the property. 8 Mile Road, Montier, State Fair, Wyoming Superhighway, 7 Mile, Outer Drive, and Northwestern are all about Blackstone number 6. Okay, so if we look at this here, Blackstone Park number 6. This is this development. Let me see here. This is this development here, Blackstone Park number 6. The vision for this part of Detroit was grand. The super subdivision with the big future crowned an ad that ran in the Detroit Free Press in 1925. The super subdivision with the big future. This was the ad that ran in the Detroit Free Press newspaper in 1925 over a sketch of elegant homes nestled among shade trees. The ad for the Blackstone Park number 6 subdivision promoted low prices, financing, and, quote, the restrictions that bring demand for home sites, end quote. Okay. And once again, this is this ad here. It ran, let me see. This is the ad here that ran in 1925 in the Detroit Free Press, and it shows a sketch of the subdivision. Now, those restrictions almost invariably included race, said Thomas Segrew, a New York University historian who wrote a book about race and inequality in Detroit. Okay. And I learned about Thomas Segrew when we were going through this fake bankruptcy here in Detroit. And I read some of his book dealing with this. I haven't had a chance to finish the book, but his book is The Origins of the Urban Crisis, Race and Inequality in Post-War Detroit. The Origin of the Urban Crisis, Race and Inequality in Post-War Detroit. Okay. That's by Thomas Segrew. If we go back to this article here, Thomas Segrew is a New York University historian who wrote a book about race and inequality in Detroit. Living there required white skin. Now, despite the developers' division, Blackstone Park number 6 was slow to become a reality. Federal lenders at the time relied on color-coded maps that deemed some white neighborhoods safe investments, shading them blue or green, while others were shaded red, meaning hazardous. And this is dealing with redlining. We talked about redlining yesterday, okay, which goes back to 1937 and the Homeowners Loan Corporation. Read this piece here from blackpast.org on redlining, and it deals with how redlining was created by the federal government. It's adopted by banks and insurance companies, and it was used against African Americans to lock us out of being able to use government programs to buy homes and buy property, things like this. Okay, the redlining system. All right, now, despite the developers' division, Blackstone Park number 6 was slow to become a reality. Federal lenders at the time relied on color-coded maps that deemed some neighborhoods safe investments, shading them blue or green, while others were shaded red, meaning hazardous. Now, the practice known as redlining, which was created by the federal government, forced people living in red zones to borrow money at higher interest rates or resort to predatory lenders. It remains a majority reason why African Americans whose neighborhoods were nearly always shaded red today have about 1/10 of the household wealth of white Americans, Thomas Segrew said. He's absolutely correct. This goes back to history and goes back to the federal government. It remains the redlining and being locked out of being able to acquire homes during this period of time, the 50s and 60s and things like this, being able to buy homes without having to go to predatory lenders, without having to resort to predatory lenders, being able to take advantage of the 3% down or low interest loans that the Federal Housing Administration was offering to white people. Okay, being able to fully take advantage of the GI Bill and things like this. If we go back and look at the piece from InTheseTimes.com, and we talked about this yesterday, they dealt with the Federal Housing Administration, and this talks about the 1949. Okay, now this article, they changed the name of this article. I read this article back when the bankruptcy was taking place, all this stuff, and the fake bankruptcy that took place here in Detroit, emergency manager, all that stuff orchestrated by the federal government, orchestrated by Governor Snyder and all that. The name of this article is A Half Century After Detroit Uprising, Cities Still Stranded by Capitalism and Federal Government. The original name of this article, because I have the original article printed, the original name of this article, this is by Marilyn Katz. It's an excellent article, August 8th, 2013. Okay. The original name of this article was called Detroit's Downfall. Detroit's Downfall, Beyond the Myth of Black Misleadership. Google that title. The original name of this article was called Detroit's Downfall, Beyond the Myth of Black Misleadership. Because what the article is showing is that when Coleman Alexander Young in January 1974 was sworn in as mayor, when African Americans became mayors of other big cities, those cities were already on life support. White people had already started fleeing the cities. Businesses had already started leaving the cities, things like this. Detroit had its first budget deficit in 1961. That's 6 years before the Detroit Rebellion. Okay. Coleman Alexander Young did not run white people out of Detroit. They were leaving before the 1967 rebellion started. And by August of 67, 300,000 people had already left Detroit, basically white people, and they're moving out to the suburbs. But it's one piece here I want to zone in on, because when we understand this history, we understand politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. And we see the role that the federal government has played through laws and policies. White workers follow. So they're talking about this along with the auto industry went jobs. In 1960, only Chrysler produced cars in Detroit. It's 60,000 Detroit workers, representing only half those employed just a decade earlier. In less than 2 decades, from 1947 to 1967, Detroit lost 128,000 jobs in the auto industry. Okay, this is this 20-year period of time. This is before Mayor Coleman Alexander Young, 1947 to 1967. Now, white workers followed. White workers followed. The jobs are leaving. White workers are following, and they're leaving. And see, this is all after World War II. See, after World War II is a critical period of time. And we're going to deal with this in the 10-week online course that I'm going to teach starting Saturday, July 24th, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power, because as the Great Migration is taking place and more African Americans are moving from the South up north, you're having these racial conflicts in the areas that they're moving into, racial conflicts with white people. After World War II ends, and you have the baby boomer generation, and you have these men coming back home, they're having children. Now they need to move out of the places that they're in now, the small cramped apartments or what have you, and they need to buy homes for families. Okay, so you're going to have white people moving out to suburbs, and they're using federal loan programs to buy these homes out in the suburbs. Then you're going to have businesses moving out to the suburbs as well. Then you're going to have the Interstate Highway Acts, the Federal Interstate Highway Acts in 1952 and 1956 that drive 41,000 miles of U.S. interstate highways, and it's going to run through all across the country, run through about 1,600 African-American communities. And it's running expressways from the downtown business district out to the suburbs to where white people are moving to. And it's running through African-American communities, wiping out homes that we own, wiping out businesses that we owned, etc. It ran right through I-375, ran right through Black Bottom and Paradise Valley right here in Detroit, wiping out homes, wiping out businesses. And we're going to see this across the country. We see this in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the Greenwood district, and the expressways are going to run through in 1970. Interstate, it was Interstate, I think 244. And then you have a U.S. highway. They're going to run through and wipe out some of the remaining black owned businesses there and wipe out land that we own. In 1970, we're going to see this take place across the country. So when we talk about the infrastructure bill that's being debated now, there's $20 billion in the infrastructure bill to try to at least start addressing some of this damage that was done by these federal programs, these federal interstate highway acts that helped to destroy African-American communities. All right. Now, if we go back to this piece here, it says, white workers followed. White workers followed the auto jobs that were leaving from 1947 to 1967. Now, 1947, that's 2 years after World War II ends. That's 4 years after the Detroit race riot in 1943 up and down Woodward Avenue, which took place during World War II. Huge race riot as well. So we're going to see these racial tensions explode. Okay. In the North, as more African Americans move into these different cities. Now, in 1950, Detroit was dominated. Well, in 1950, Detroit was a white dominated city. By 1970, more whites lived in the suburbs of Detroit than in the city of Detroit. While ignited by the movement of auto jobs to the suburbs, this mass white exodus was fueled by the federal government and its policies. Okay, so when they talk about, now, I'm not saying African-American mayors and city council members didn't make mistakes. Yes, they did, but so did white people. So did white mayors and city council members. But they leave out how the federal government helped to sabotage what took place. So then when we take over these cities, they're already on life support. They're already on life support. In the role the federal government played gets left out of this. This mass exodus was fueled by the federal government and its policies. In 1949, Congress passed the Federal Housing Act, the FHA, the Federal Housing Act. 1949, 4 years after World War II ends. For the first time, home ownership required only 3% down for an attractive low interest rate mortgage. 3% down for an attractive low interest rate mortgage. So white people are white men basically using this to buy homes in the newly formed suburbs. The Federal Housing Act guidelines favored mortgages in the new suburban developments that were popping up to meet post-World War II demand and actively discourage their use in older inner city neighborhoods where African Americans had moved into and were being left in, while you have, and you're going to have the hollowing out of the industrial infrastructure in these inner cities. So these businesses and factories are going to leave the inner cities and move out to the suburbs as well. Armed with new Federal Housing Act, FHA armed with the new Federal Housing Act product and Veterans Affairs loans, white workers moved with the companies to the suburbs, trading in their houses in what had become a racially mixed city of Detroit, a racially mixed city for a suburban tract home in then virtually all white neighborhoods. Rather than congregate with others on the way to work in a streetcar, they drove past sprawling suburbs on the new highways, lobbied for by the big auto industry and the big three, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, lobbied for the expressways that ran through our communities and destroyed homes and destroyed businesses and land taken by eminent domain. And these highways were built at taxpayer expense and to the detriment of the African American community. For Black Detroit, the story was quite different. Nearly 200,000 African Americans have moved to Detroit since 1930, and by 1950, blacks accounted for 16.8% of the population of Detroit. We're going to go to clip 2, so get that ready, dealing with reparations in Detroit. While they might have wanted to follow the jobs that moved to the suburbs, they could not. While they might have wanted to follow the jobs that moved to the suburbs, they could not. With equal housing laws still in the future, they were excluded. African Americans were excluded from buying in the suburban housing developments by developers and real estate agents, even though our taxpayer dollars are subsidizing these government programs that white people are using to accumulate wealth. Nor could they get FHA loans, Federal Housing Act loans, to buy or improve homes in the city neighborhoods where they could live because the government considered such loans too risky because they're using the redlining system, which was created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which was a federal entity, and they're using this to lock us out of economic opportunity. Now, some of the same white people who took advantage of these programs are part of that 40% of white people that the Gallup poll study showed April 4th, 2018, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Dr. King. They said black people, 40% of white Americans surveyed said African Americans could be as equally as successful as white people if they just tried harder. Maybe if we had the same programs that you took advantage of and our taxpayer dollars subsidized, maybe we can be equally as successful also. Why don't you try that? Nor could they get FHA loans to buy or improve homes in the city neighborhoods where they could live because the government considered such loans too risky. African-American neighborhoods already chopped up during the 40s and 50s to build the very highways that took whites out of the city. And those jobs to build the highways went largely to white men too. Let's just be honest. Became even more isolated and isolating, making things worse as federal dollars were transferred to road building. Public transit dollars dried up, and in 1956, with the active lobbying of Big Auto, the auto industry, the big three, General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler, the historic streetcar system in Detroit disappeared, leaving no reliable public transportation. Let's go to this clip too here. This deals with the reparations resolution that passed City Council on Tuesday. Let's go to this clip.
Council has voted in favor of a reparations commitment.
It's a first step toward what advocates see as applying a racial equity framework for Detroit's black community. For the latest, we turn to Local 4's Larry Spruill live outside City Hall tonight with more. Larry.
Good evening, Kimberly and Devin. This proposal was presented by Councilwoman Mary Sheffield earlier today. Now, it's 3 pages long, but very detailed. It outlines the proposal itself, who will benefit from it, and how. Take a listen.
Member Ayers moved the resolution. Are there any objections? Hearing none, the resolution is approved.
Approved in just minutes from Detroit City Council on Tuesday, Council President Pro Tem Mary Sheffield presented a 3-page reparations proposal addressing the unfair treatment of black people across our country, especially here in Detroit. The document states black people have been consistently and widely impoverished by discriminatory wages paid in every sector of the economy, regardless of credentials and experience based on property, income, and wealth advantage. Now City Council is trying to right that wrong. They're following other cities who passed a similar bill, like Asheville, North Carolina, Evansville, Illinois, St. Paul, Minnesota, and Durham, North Carolina. The bill also states the Detroit City Council demands a strong and sufficient United States federal government program funding commitment to reparations, funding programs that should be administered at the local level. We're talking about right to water and sanitation, right to environmental health, right to live free from discrimination, right to recreation, right to access and mobility, and right to housing, just to name a few. And so here are the next steps. This proposal will now be presented in front of the Elections Commission. If they decide to vote on it and make sure that all the requirements are met, legal requirements are met, then it'll be placed on the ballot in November. We are live outside City Hall tonight. Larry Spruill, Local 4. Okay.
All right. That's courtesy of WDIV Channel 4 here in Detroit. Check out their article. They have some good reporting on this. Detroit City Council votes in favor of reparations commitment. City Council is following other cities who passed a similar bill. This ties directly in the reason why you have to repair the damage ties directly into the story dealing with the wall built in Detroit and how we were locked out of economic opportunities. largely locked out of economic opportunities. This article is from July 20th, 2021. All right. Those watching on our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network, and our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, keep watching. We're going to keep broadcasting for a few more minutes. We'll talk about the New York Draft Riot of 1863. Be sure to visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Register for the new 10-week online course. They're starting up Saturday, July 24th, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, from the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power. We're going to do it 1865 to 1968. And we do the class live. All the sessions are recorded, and you can go back and watch the content over and over again. As soon as you register, there's bonus content that you can start watching also. The class is regularly $130, on sale $80 at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Remember, right now is correct your own behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. And we'll talk to you tomorrow. Peace. All right, stand by. Stand by, everybody. Hold on. Let me disconnect this call. Okay. All right. So register for this class. Who still needs to register for this 10-week online course? And this is the first time I taught this one. This is fantastic. A lot of information that I've been dealing with here. This is going to be in this class. Is going to be more extensive. What we're going to do is, this is a 10-week online course. So each week, it meets on Saturdays, 10 consecutive Saturdays. Each week, what we'll do is we'll analyze an approximately 10-year period of time in history. We're starting in 1865 with 40 acres and a mule, special field order number 15, 40 acres and a mule, and the end of the Civil War, April 9th, 1865, and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, April 14th, 1865. We'll look at Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865, the ratification of the 13th Amendment, December 6th, 1865. And we'll look at the Reconstruction era, 1865 to 1877, advancements African Americans are making, acquiring land, being elected to Congress, being elected to the U.S. Senate, etc. Then we'll look at the end of Reconstruction and the Compromise of 1877, and how we're going to see a reversal of these rights, and the rise in domestic terrorism. Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896 U.S. Supreme Court case, which legalizes separate and equal, and legalizes Jim Crow laws. Mississippi State Constitution, 1890. Louisiana State Constitution, 1898. Grandfather Clause of 1898. And the Mississippi State Constitution of 1898, what this does is this legalizes, they write into the Constitution of Mississippi, state of Mississippi, the poll taxes and literacy tests. Okay. And other southern states are going to adopt state constitutions like this, Alabama and different things like this. So we see this play out in the movie Selma, dealing with the fight for the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So we'll deal with all that, and we'll go through our history and go into the early 1900s, the Great Migration, 1915 to 1970, World War I, 1914 to 1918, World War II, U.S. getting involved in World War II, 1941 to 45, the post-war era, what happens after that, the racial tensions, us being locked out of taking advantage of these government programs like I was just talking about. So we'll go through our history, and then we'll go into the civil rights movement, and Brown versus Board of Education, 1954, the lynching of Emmett Till, 1955, August 28th, 1955, Montgomery bus boycott, December 1955, all of that, civil rights movement, and then the Black Power movement, and the Black Power movement coming out of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Okay. So we'll go through history, and each class, we're going to analyze an approximately 10-year period of time to understand what happened after slavery. Okay. Understand what happened after slavery, the laws and policies that were put in place, and how we got to where we are today to understand where we need to go after this. It was laws and policies that put us in this predicament. It's going to be laws and policies that get us out of this predicament. Okay. Contrary to popular belief, it's not going to be economic empowerment that gets us out of this predicament. Economic empowerment is important, but that's not how we got here. So a lot of people that preach economic empowerment don't really understand the history of how we got here. All right. We have to leverage our economics to enforce our political agenda. And we'll see economics and politics coming together. We have to leverage our economics to enforce our politics. But thinking the solution to bad public policies is economic empowerment means you don't understand either one of them. Thinking that the solution to bad public policies, all this is the result of bad public policies, laws and policies. You have to understand their impact and effect. To think the solution to bad public policies is economic empowerment means you really don't understand either one of them. Solution to bad public policies is follow the politicians that keep writing the bad public policies, run better candidates, pass better laws that are beneficial to you so you can reverse this. Economic empowerment is important. My degree's in business administration. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm saying that economic empowerment is not the prescription to the ailment of bad public policies. That's what I'm saying. Okay. So register for that online course. We'll post the link here. And as soon as you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, scroll down the homepage of our website. You can register there. Click on register here. It takes you to the next page, and and then click on enroll. Okay. Take you to our online school. Click on enroll. As soon as you register, you start watching. We have some bonus content there. We have the first 3 classes of the other 10-week online course that I teach. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay. So if you've taken that 10-week online course before, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, this class will pick up where that one left off. All right. This class will pick up where that one left off. If you haven't taken the other one, you can register for that, because we have a Sunday course. That just started up for Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa. That class is Sunday, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. that I teach also. But we have it at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. All right, let's continue here. Okay, how's everybody doing? Who still needs to register for this new online course that starts up Saturday, July 24th? Let me know if you need to register, if you need me to post the information again. All right, we've got Kenya, Latreya, Greg, Joey, Ruby, Adrian, just a few of the people watching. All right, let's continue. I want to go to, I want to switch gears and get to this information dealing with the New York Draft Riot. This information dealing with reparations here in Detroit is really important, and it deals with reparations is not winning the lotto, is not cut the check. It's repairing damage that was done, especially a legacy of slavery and Jim Crow segregation. It's understanding repairing the damage that was done, and at the same time, you also have to change the laws that are still in existence that are still inflicting damage as well. Okay. So unfortunately, a lot of people think reparations is just a check. No, it's not just a check. The reason why is because every year we talk about how 97% of our dollars are spent with people that don't look like us. So if we all get $250,000 a day, or 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever it is, white people will have it all back by this time next week. And you wouldn't have done anything to address the damage that was done and deal with the racial wealth gap and how it came to existence. You have to change those laws and policies. If you think reparations is just a check, once again, however much we get today, white people are going to have it all back by this time next week. Only thing we would have done is stimulated their economy, and all those laws and policies that are still in place, inflicting harm upon us, will still be there. That's why we have to focus on repairing the damage that was done. But you first have to assess the damage that was done. That's why the study is so important. That's why in Evanston, Illinois, what they did in the housing program that they have there, that's to address a pervasive history of redlining in Evanston, Illinois. Now, I interviewed Fifth Ward Alderwoman Robin Ruth Simmons, who has left that position now, but I interviewed her here on the show for an hour. And that episode is archived. You can go back and watch it. I interviewed her for an hour, and we went through step by step and broke all this stuff down. And she talked about how the program that they had, the program that they came up with, was to address redlining, because in Evanston, Illinois, they did not have a history of slavery. In Evanston, Illinois, was founded in the 1840s. Slavery was abolished in the state of Illinois in 1818. This is why you got to do research and understand history. And their study, this is the study here that their program was based upon. Okay, so I read a lot of the study to prepare for my interview with her. And in doing research, you know, when I talked to her on the phone, like to set up the interview, I was saying, you know, I've been doing research on Evanston, Illinois. I hear all these people saying, oh, this is not reparations because they should address slavery. I said, I haven't found any evidence that slavery ever existed in Evanston, Illinois. She said, you know, I'm so glad you said that, because there's a whole lot of people out here talking, putting stuff out and haven't done any research. They didn't have a history of slavery in Evanston, Illinois, but they had a pervasive history of redlining. And that's what their program is designed to address. Now, it's the first part of that program. It's not all that they want to do. It's the first part of that. But the name of the study is Evanston Policies and Practices Directly Affecting the African-American Community, 1900 to 1960 and present. Okay, this is a 70-page study that was done in 2020 that documents the history of what happened and how devastating the redlining system was to African Americans in Evanston, and the racial discrimination they faced there even before the term redlining came into existence. The first African American residents in Evanston came in 1855, and he suffered discrimination. Okay, so that's why they did what they did. All right, now, if we switch gears here and look at the New York Draft Riot of 1863, okay, there was a article from Zen Education Project. Zen Education Project has a piece from dealing with this. July 13th, 1863. July 13th, 1863. The New York Draft Riot. And this takes place during the Civil War, which is a really, really pivotal time in the history of this country. But this takes place during the Civil War after the Emancipation Proclamation, and is going to change the trajectory of the Civil War. The Emancipation Proclamation changes the trajectory of the Civil War and the purpose of it. Okay, so I want to go to this piece here. Let me pull this up here. The New York Draft Riot. And you're going to have poor white men rebelling against the draft, and they don't want to go fight in the Civil War on behalf of the Union. And, you know, they're afraid that if the slaves are freed also, that the slaves are going to take their jobs as well. Now, you know, at the same time, it's important to understand that the slaves are already doing their jobs and doing it for free, because there are at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865. And we were working in all these industries, okay, and doing this for free. Also, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show. We're here 6 days a week. This helps us keep doing the research, stay on the air, keep broadcasting, pay some of the bills, etc. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN Show, SHOW. And it'll show my name there, Michael, and show my picture there also. These other ones, these are fake African History Network Cash App accounts that were set up. I'm trying to get them shut down. I already contacted Cash App. They're like really slow in taking care of things like this. Okay. And also through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow. All right, let's look at this here from the Zen Education Project. So the riot lasted 5 days. Started Monday morning, July 13th, 1863. And the first draft took place July 11th, 1863. So on this anniversary of the New York City draft riots and massacre, because estimates are between 199 and 1,100 people were killed, many of them African Americans. We are sharing. Okay, let's see. Okay. So in chapter 10 of A People's History of the United States, Howard Zinn talked about the Conscription Act of 1863. Okay, Conscription Act of 1863. Now, this riot lasted nearly a week, and the riots were the largest civil insurrection in U.S. history besides the Civil War itself at the time. The Conscription Act of 1863 provided that rich white men could avoid military service. They could pay $300 or buy a substitute person, white man, to go serve in the military, go serve in the Civil War, go fight in the military. In the summer of 1863, a song of conscripts was circulated by the thousands in New York and other cities. One stanza of this song said, "We're coming, Father Abraham, 300,000 more. We leave our homes and firesides with bleeding hearts and sore. Since property has been our crime, we bow to thy creed. We are the poor and have no wealth to purchase liberty." Okay, so they can't buy their way out of this. They have to pay the $300 fine and go to prison. They can't buy their way out of this like white men can, like wealthy white men can. Now, when recruiting for the army began in July 1863, a mob in New York wrecked the main recruiting station. Then, for 3 days, crowds of white workers marched through the city of New York, destroying buildings, factories, streetcar lines, and homes. The draft riots were complex. Now, these were the riots were anti-African American, anti-black. They were against the wealthy, anti-rich, anti-Republican. Republican Party at the time was basically the party of abolitionists. We're going to see this flip beginning with the Lily White movement in 1928, which culminates with the completion of the party realignment in the late 1960s. From an assault on draft headquarters, the rioters went on to attacks on wealthy homes, then to the murder of African Americans. They marched through the streets, forcing factories to close, recruiting more members of the mob. They marched through the streets, forcing factories to close, recruiting more members of the mob. They set the city's colored orphan asylum on fire. Okay. Now, in reading another account of this, they didn't harm any of the children, but they did steal food and bedding and different things like this from the orphanage. Okay. And they set the orphanage on fire also. It was a colored orphanage there in New York City. This is a picture here from Harper's Weekly. This is a picture here of Harper's Weekly of the burning of the orphanage. It's a Yes, this is a drawing here of the burning of the orphanage. This is from 1863. All right, now. Okay, let me try to pull this up here. Just a second. Okay, let's continue here. Okay, so the draft riots were anti-black, anti-rich, anti-Republican. They set the city's colored orphan asylum on fire. They shot, burned, and hanged African Americans they found in the streets. Many people were thrown into the rivers to drown. On the fourth day of the riots, and these riots last for 5 days. On the fourth day of the riots, Union troops returning from the Battle of Gettysburg came into the city and stopped the rioting. Perhaps 400 people were killed. Now, this is according to Zen Education Project. We're going to look at the information from history.com, because history.com says basically, officially, it was said 119 people were killed. 119 people were killed. That was 119 deaths were published, but it's estimated as high as 1,200 people were killed. Now, on the fourth day of these riots, Union troops returned from the Battle of Gettysburg and came into the city and stopped the rioting. Now, perhaps 400 people were killed. No exact figures have ever been given, but the number of lives lost was greater than in any other incident of domestic violence in U.S. history. Okay. That's up until probably the Tulsa Race Massacre, 1921. Because the official counts there are 300, and that came from the Red Cross, but it's estimated that hundreds more were killed. Now, just a second here. Okay, I want to look at the information here from. I want to look at the information here from history.com. History.com has a really good article dealing with this. New York Draft Riots. New York Draft Riots from history.com. The New York Draft Riots of 1863 occurred. The New York Draft Riots occurred in July 1863 when the anger of working class New Yorkers, over a new federal draft law during the Civil War sparked 5 days of some of the bloodiest and most destructive rioting in U.S. history. Hundreds of people were killed, many more injured, and African Americans were often the target of the rioters. Okay. Now, New York City was divided before the Civil War as the business capital of the nation, business capital of the United States. New York City had not welcomed the onset of the Civil War, as it meant losing the South as a trading partner, because you had a lot of factories up north and they're getting raw materials coming from the South, like cotton. They're getting that, and they are the North is relying upon the South for raw materials, for instance. The cotton was an extremely valuable product for New York's merchants. Before the Civil War, cotton represented 40% of all the goods out of the city of New York's port. Before the Civil War, cotton represented 40% of all the goods shipped out of the city's port. And long after the slave trade was the international transatlantic slave trade, long after the international transatlantic slave trade was made illegal in 1808, the city's illicit slave market thrived. So the International Congress passes a law to abolish the international transatlantic slave trade, March 2nd, 1807. Okay, March 2nd, 1807. And then that goes into effect January 1st, 1808. Okay. All right. Thanks, Agenda Media, for your support. Really appreciate that. Thank you. This is a lot of work people just don't understand. And I know I've said this before. I don't know how many people know this. And when I tell people this, they're surprised. So I do radio 6 days a week on 9 10 a.m. Superstation WFDF. I don't get paid to do radio. They don't pay me to do radio. Okay. I've been on that radio station for 5 years. Some people have to pay for airtime. I don't have to pay for airtime because of my content, but they don't pay me. All right. So everything, I got to generate revenue to be able to keep doing all this stuff, through the DVD lectures and the online courses and selling ads and all that stuff. They don't pay me to do radio. I wish they did, but you know, it is what it is. When the war broke out in 1861, there was even talk of New York seceding from the Union itself. So the Civil War starts 1861 with the attack on Fort Sumter. Okay, thanks, Adrian. With the attack on Fort Sumter, April 12, 1861. Now, and these are some of the things that we're going to deal with in the online course. Even though we start in 1865, I'm going to take about 30 minutes or so and give you some background history to bring us up to 1865. The South Carolina is the first state to secede from the Union, December 20th, 1860. December 20th, 1860. South Carolina is the first state to secede from the Union. 6 weeks after Abraham Lincoln becomes president-elect. Okay, he's president-elect. He's of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is a newly formed political party. They were formed 6 years prior. They're formed in 1854, and they're formed by groups of abolitionists as a direct backlash to the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 dealt with, because of westward expansion and land that was acquired after the Mexican-American War, 1846, 1848, and land acquired from the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, things like this. But the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, what this does is this leaves up to people moving into these new territories. It leaves up to them to determine whether or not they want to have slavery, as opposed to it being dictated to them by the federal government. Okay, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. And as a backlash to that, we're going to see the Republican Party formed. Now, the Democratic Party exists at this time, and the Whig Party exists at this. Well, the Whig Party is dying out. There are going to be members of the Whig Party who helped form the Republican Party. The Whig Party, WHIG, is formed in 1834. The Democratic Party is formed in 1828. Contrary to popular belief, because I hear people say the Democratic Party created slavery. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? No, they didn't. The majority of the time slavery existed in this country, you didn't have a Democratic or Republican Party. Democratic Party is founded in 1828. They're known as Jacksonian Democrats, named after President Andrew Jackson. And we see the Republican Party formed in 1854. All right. So as a backlash to Lincoln becoming president, because the southern slaveholding states think Lincoln is going to free the slaves. All right. So South Carolina is the first state to secede December 20th, 1860. They're going to be followed by about 6 other states. And the Civil War is going to start April 12th of the following year, April 12th, 1861. So when the war broke out in 1861, there was even talk of New York, the state of New York, seceding from the Union itself. So entwined were the city's business interests with the Confederate States. Okay. They said this is about the money. Now, as the war progressed, New York's anti-war politicians and newspapers kept warning its working class white citizens, many of them Irish or German immigrants, that emancipation would mean their replacement in the labor force by thousands of freed, enslaved people from the South. Okay, so we have to pay attention to what's taking place, because the same thing that took place here in 1861, and the game is being ran on poor white working class white people, is being ran on them by the elite, by the newspaper owners, by the newspaper publishers, by politicians. And they're saying, if the slaves are freed, they're going to take your jobs. Well, it's the same game that the elite are running on us today, and poor white people and things like this, talking about undocumented immigrants taking your jobs. It's the same game. Now, if they wanted to stop, so let's back up. First of all, what they don't want to talk about is how U.S. policy to Central American countries for the last 50 years, and in some cases the last 100 years, have created the conditions, have helped to create the conditions that many people are fleeing from in these Central American countries in the first place. Like, they don't want to talk about how the CIA helped to overthrow the democratically elected government in Guatemala in 1954. That helped to destabilize Guatemala. Okay. There was a piece from, I think this was Vox.com. There was a piece from Vox.com that I've talked about before. See, they really don't want to get into this history. Okay. It's not just Haiti. Okay. We can go through and look at these Central American countries that, U.S. policies have helped destabilize and create these conditions that people are fleeing from. Okay. Now, if you want to stop undocumented immigrants from getting jobs here, why wouldn't you go after the corporations that hired them and exploit their labor? It's not difficult. It's not that difficult now. You know, the corporations who are hiring them, exploiting their labor, why wouldn't you go after them and shut them down? Look at this article. Look at this article here. You can start by going to Donald Trump's golf courses and resorts, because he has undocumented immigrants working there. He got caught. People knew he was doing it. He got caught while he was demonizing them. He got caught exploiting their labor. Now, at the same time, prior to COVID-19, if you go to BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics, and read the labor report that comes out, the jobs report comes out the first Friday of each month. If you go research that, if you go read that, every month there are between 5 to 6 million unfilled jobs. Every month prior to COVID-19, there are between 5 to 6 million jobs every month that go unfilled in the economy. BLS.com, Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the Labor Department. BLS.gov, BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics, that's the Labor Department. So the same game they were running on white people poor white people back in 1861 is the same game they're running today. And then so they were saying, hey, if we in slavery, slaves going to take your jobs. Well, first of all, there were at least 262 skills, trades, and crafts that African people had in this country from 1619 to 1865, and we were doing the work largely for free. So most of those jobs we were already doing. Yes, if slavery ended, we could compete for certain jobs also. But let's be honest now, okay? We were doing more than just picking cotton and cooking the master's food. But just as the elite were exploiting poor white people then, they're exploiting poor white people today. So if we look at this article here from Vice.com, because nobody wants to really deal with this history. Very few people. Now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez started talking about this history, and she called it out. People really don't want to deal with this history. The violence Central American migrants are fleeing was stoked by the U.S. Now, this is from June 28th, 2018, for Vice.com, written by Cole Kasdan, Kazdin. We're still dealing with the aftermath of atrocities committed by U.S. allies in Central America during the Cold War. Now, this is Ronald Reagan holding up a shirt saying, "Stop Communism, Central America." This is from 1986, this picture. Okay. And, this deals with the Contra rebels in El Salvador and all these Central American countries that the U.S., their policies to these Central American countries have been harmful and help create the conditions that people are fleeing from. Then when they flee from the conditions, you want to criminalize them, but you don't want to talk about how you contributed to the conditions that they're fleeing from and the violence they're fleeing from. It's just like Donald Trump liked to talk about MS-13. But Donald Trump didn't want to tell you that MS-13 started in Los Angeles, California in the 1980s, and then they went into Mexico. MS-13 did not start in Mexico and come here. MS-13 started in Los Angeles, California in the 1980s, the gang, the Mexican gang, MS-13. They started in Los Angeles, California, and they went into Mexico. He doesn't want to talk about stuff like that. So as courts, law enforcement, and the Trump administration, because this article came out when Trump was the dictator in chief, was in office, and the Trump administration continued to sort out what to do with the steady stream of migrants, either crossing the southern border illegally or seeking asylum, the roots of the current misery are often forgotten. The desperate border crossings often come from Central America's northern triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, and are fleeing high homicide rates and violence in those countries. But this instability did not arise in a vacuum. Many historians and policy experts are quick to point out that much of the troubles in Central America were created or at least helped by the U.S. government's interference in those countries going back decades. In other words, the foreign policy of the past has profoundly shaped the present immigration crisis. Elizabeth Oglesby, an associate professor of Latin American Studies at the University of Arizona, said hundreds of thousands of people were displaced in the 1980s. People were fleeing violence and massacres and political persecution that the United States was either funding directly or at the very minimum covering up and excusing. People were fleeing violence and massacres and political persecution that the United States was either funding directly or at the very minimum covering up and excusing. We would call that the chickens coming home to roost. That's what we would call that. Violence today in those countries, she said, is a direct legacy of U.S. involvement. Now, Professor Elizabeth Oglesby spoke to Kasdan, the writer of this article, from Guatemala, which even today in 2018, when this article was written, is still feeling the cumulative effects of U.S. actions from over 50 years ago. Now, if you don't think so, let's just pause right here for a minute. We're going to get back to the other article in just a minute. This is pause right here for a minute. Still feeling the effects of what happened 50 years ago, Guatemala. If you've been watching my show, we talked about Jamaica in the news, petitioning, putting together a petition for Great Britain and Queen Elizabeth II demanding reparations. Cuba in the news, protesting over the economy and lack of resources and food, things like this. Haiti in the news. Ariel Henry was just sworn in as the new president of Haiti after Claude Joseph stepped down and after Jovenel Moise was assassinated July 7th. And Haiti, Jamaica, and Cuba were all countries that Christopher Columbus and the Spanish conquered in 1492 and 1494. We're still feeling the effects of what happened over 500 years ago because they were all colonies of Spain. And then the West, and then the island of Hispaniola, the western portion, is going to be taken over by the French and called Saint Dominique. And then 1791 to January 1st, 1804, you have the Haitian Revolution, and the Haitians beat the hell out the French. 1803, you have the Louisiana Purchase of 1803, where France sells 828,000 square miles of land for less than 3 cents an acre to the U.S. for $15 million. And the U.S. is going to carve out about 15 states out of that. We're still feeling the effects of what happened over 500 years ago, about 529 years ago. 1492, Columbus conquers Cuba, and 1494 Jamaica, and Hispaniola in 1492 also. His first voyage, 1492. We deal with this in the online course I teach, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach in school. We go and deal with Columbus. We go all throughout this and show you what Columbus went on his 4 voyages. He never came to the land we call the United States of America. He never came to the land we call the United States of America. The closest he came to the U.S. is Cuba, which is 90 miles away. If we're still dealing with the effects of over 500 years ago and what the Spanish and Columbus did, and then also Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico was conquered by Columbus as well. If we're still dealing with the effects of over 500 years ago, you think Guatemala ain't dealing with what happened 50 years ago? But this is what happens when you don't understand history. So Professor Oglesby, speaking from Guatemala, said and Guatemala is even today still feeling the cumulative effects of U.S. actions from over 50 years ago, when the CIA helped overthrow the democratically elected Guatemalan government. That was 1954. In the 1950s, Guatemala attempted to end exploitative labor practices and give land to Mayan Indians in the highlands. The move, according to now unclassified CIA documents, threatened U.S. interests like the U.S. Fruit Company, which controlled a good portion of land in Guatemala. But instead of citing economic factors, many in the U.S. cried, quote unquote, communism, like dumbass Republicans are crying communism and socialism today. They were doing this back in the 1950s. Crying, but most of them can't tell you what communism and socialism is, and most of them back then couldn't tell you what it is either. The move, according to now unclassified CIA documents, threatened U.S. interests like the United Fruit Company, which controlled a good portion of land in Guatemala. But instead of citing economic factors, many in the U.S. cried communism, saying the labor reforms were a threat to democracy. Wisconsin Senator Alexander Wiley, chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, at the time said he believed that a quote unquote communist octopus had used its tentacles to control events in Guatemala. In 1954, The CIA helped organize a military coup to organize Guatemala's democratically elected government and continued to train the Guatemalan military well into the 1970s. Quote, the war in Guatemala was really a genocide, Professor Oglesby said, adding that an estimated 200,000 people were killed in the subsequent 36-year-long civil war, which stretched from 1960 to 1996. Quote, the history is important because it went so far beyond anti-communism. The purpose was to destroy people's vision of the future. It had a terrible impact on the country. Hundreds of thousands of people were displaced. Well, it continues today. In Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Honduras, there are similar stories. Now, Honduras was one of the islands that Columbus conquered as well. When in the late 1970s, the Nicaraguan resistance group called the Sandinistas overthrew the country's dictatorship that had been in power for over 40 years, the U.S. opposed the revolution. The U.S. backed the dictatorship, and the U.S. later supported the rebel group known as the Contras. In El Salvador, the U.S. gave billions of dollars to the El Salvadorian government to fight the socialist Farabundo Multinational Liberation Front, FMLN, and used Honduras as a base to hold military exercises. So read the rest of this here. Let me get back to the other article dealing with 1863. But all this history is connected. Then they talk about Richard Nixon and the war on drugs that he declared June 17, 1971. And we know the war on drugs was an attack on the anti-Vietnam movement, an attack on the African-American community. Adding to, the article goes on to say, adding to the instability from the various civil wars the U.S. was involved in throughout the region, Richard Nixon's so-called war on drugs beginning in 1971 pushed cartels from Colombia into an increasingly unstable and impoverished Central America. The drug trafficking routes began to change, and that coincided with economic crisis in the region and criminal networks that took up the trafficking that was displaced out of Colombia, said Professor Oglesby. She was quick to emphasize that while MS-13, the gang MS-13 garners most of the headlines today in 2018, and whose origins are in Los Angeles, not Central America, because when MS-13 started in the good old US of A. That's homegrown terrorism. MS-13 that was exported into Mexico. Quote, a much deeper problem for Central America are government-linked organized crime networks that come directly out of the counterinsurgency experience of the 1980s. Read this full article here. This is the history that people don't want to deal with. This is the history people don't want to deal with. This is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was talking about. It was a few people, and it was some various Latino activists and things like this. They were saying, look, you got to deal with the history of U.S. involvement in these countries before you start pointing fingers at people and nobody is calling for open borders. Yeah, you have to have immigration policies, but well, hold on. Let's stop for a minute here. Okay. And let's look at why they're fleeing, the conditions they're fleeing, who helped create these conditions. Okay. This is from Vice.com. The violence Central American migrants are fleeing was stoked by the U.S. Okay, now let's go back to this piece here. let's go back to this piece here from this is from, which one is this? History.com. Okay. All right. How y'all doing? How y'all like this type of information? So if you like this type of information, be sure to register for my new 10-week online course that starts up Saturday, July 24th, 2021. This is going to be 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement and Black Power. We'll do it 1865 to 1968. Okay. And each class will go through and analyze approximately a 10-year period of time and get deep into this history to understand what happened and how we got here, to understand what the next steps are and policies that need to be put in place. Okay. Because all this is the result of bad policies. Okay. All this is a result of some policies are good, but a lot of them are bad public policies. And the other thing that we have to understand is protecting gains that were made. I played the clip from Cora Masters, who's the widow of Marion Barry, DC Mayor Marion Barry. And that's from Roland Martin Unfiltered, Friday, July 16th, when I was on Roland's show. I'll be back on the show this Friday. I'm a panelist each Friday on Roland Martin Unfiltered. And she talked about how what's going on right now with the fight for the Voting Rights Act, the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, all this stuff. She said, we fought this battle, and she was involved in fighting this battle in 65. And she said, all the gains we made, they've largely been taken back. And something that many of us don't understand is the concept of protecting gains that were made. Many of us don't understand the concept that we have to protect gains that were made. Okay. I want to play this clip here. This is from, let me cue this up. This is from Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go to this clip. Let me see. Is this the right one here? Let me go to Core Masters. I want you to hear this here. Which one is this? Hold on. Okay, here we go. This is Core Masters right here. So, but to understand the need to protect gains that were made, you have to be able to assess the gains that were made and understand that history. Okay, hold on here. Damn. Where's that clip? Okay, here we go. Okay, we'll go to this just a second. I'm queuing that up.
And everything they gave us, they took away. Every law you can think about, they can just write them, just with a step of a pen, take our rights away. I'll be back. I'm never going to back down. I'm never going to stop. Fight to my death. And my kids are going to fight. Come on! I'm not going to do it to us again. 60 years of this. All bills, 13, 14, 15th Amendment, 1964, 65. And we're back here again? Are you kidding me? I'm madder than I've ever been. Death or vote. You're going to have to vote. And I'm telling everybody, if the black people stop from voting, everybody loses. It's not a black battle. It's a democracy battle. All the Democrats need to be out here. All the people of color and all the people of righteousness need to be out here. It's not a black battle. It's a moral battle. It's a moral law. They're trying to take everything from us. If we don't vote, we die. If we don't vote, Jim Crow. If we don't vote, separate bathrooms. If we don't vote, slavery.
Okay, so that was at the Senate office building. Okay, the Hart Senate office building. And that was the day that the sisters got arrested. Okay, that Thursday that they got arrested. And we know that Friday the activists met with Vice President Kamala Harris. Okay, read the article here from thegrio.com. We talked about this here last week. Vice President Harris hosts Black women voting rights activists after their arrest. Okay, so read that. And it gets deep into this information. They have a picture. Okay, that's them with Vice President Kamala Harris at the White House in the meeting. This is the sisters here. This is Cora Masters over here on my left. All right. Widow of Marion Barry. Okay, so check out that piece. Check out that article. Okay, let's go back to this here. Let's see here. Okay. So this is dealing with the draft riot of 1863. We'll be here for a few more minutes. So as the Civil War progressed, New York's anti-war politicians and newspapers kept warning its working class white citizens, many of them Irish or German immigrants, that emancipation would mean their replacement in the labor force by thousands of freed enslaved people from the South. So they're saying, no, you want to keep them enslaved. You don't want these Black people to take your jobs now. Okay. So you want to go along and we want to keep them enslaved. Now, September 1862, President Abraham Lincoln announced the initial Emancipation Proclamation. And we know the Emancipation Proclamation did not free the slaves. And I deal with this a lot also in the 2.5-hour lecture I did dealing with the history of Juneteenth. The initial Emancipation Proclamation stated that if the states in rebellion and the territories in rebellion did not come back into the Union by January 1st, 1863, that Lincoln would free those slaves in those territories. Okay. But since those territories seceded from the Union, they had no authority over them. The Union had no authority over the Confederacy. So you can't tell them to do anything. You have no legal authority. They separated from your country, set up their own government. So you have no legal authority over them in the first place. Okay. But in September 1862, Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation, which would take effect early the following year, January 1st, 1863, confirming the workers' worst fears. At the time, Lincoln's decision for emancipation sparked, because confirming the workers' worst fears, because Lincoln is threatening to free the slaves if these territories don't come back into the Union. Because the goal of the Civil War initially was not to free the slaves. It was to bring the South back into the Union. The South seceded from the Union, these 11 states, and the South was the economic engine of the country. The goal was to bring them back into the Union. Okay, not to free the slaves. And border states like Maryland and Missouri and Kentucky and Delaware, they stayed loyal to the Union. They were allowed to keep their slaves until, the Civil War ends, things like this. They're allowed to keep their slaves because they stayed loyal to the Union. So at the time, Lincoln's decision for emancipation sparked protests among workers in the city, as well as soldiers and officers in New York regiments who had signed up to preserve the Union, not to abolish slavery. Because the goal is to bring the South back into the Union. That's why they initially fought. Okay, we're going to keep the Union together. The goal of the Civil War was not to abolish slavery. So you had men who were fighting on behalf of the Union who felt betrayed because with the Emancipation Proclamation, the purpose of the war shifts. And now they start talking more about freeing the slaves. You got white men fighting on behalf of the Union say, wait a second, this ain't what we signed up for. You talked about keeping the Union together. New York federal draft law sparks unrest. Facing a dire shortage of manpower in early 1863, Lincoln's government passed a strict new, what's known as the Conscription Act of 1863, or the Conscription Law, the Conscription Act of 1863, which made all male citizens between 20 and 35 and all unmarried men between 35 and 45 subject to military duty. But there's a catch. Though all eligible men were entered into a lottery, they could buy their way out of harm's way by hiring a substitute or paying $300 to the government, roughly $5,800 today, to get out of having to fight in the military, go fight in the war. At the time, that sum of $300 was the yearly salary for the average American worker, making avoiding the draft impossible for all except the wealthiest of white men, because African American men didn't have to be drafted. Compounding the issue, African Americans were exempt from the draft. Compounding the issue, African Americans were exempt from the draft as they were not considered citizens. So poor white men are like, wait a second, hold on. Now, because see, this is July 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation is already in effect. They said, now you're talking about freeing the slaves and you want us to go and fight in the Union, when before you were saying the goal is to save the Union. Now you're talking about freeing the slaves, and the slaves are going to take our jobs, and they can't even go fight in the war. And I can't buy my way out of this like wealthy white men can. So these poor white men went on a rampage like they did January 6th at the U.S. Capitol building. They were exploited by the elite once again, dumb as hell, can't read, snuff dipping. They were exploited January 6th by the ruling elite, by Trump and Rudy Giuliani and Paul Gosar and Raphael Ted Cruz and all these people educated. They exploited then. Dumbasses exploited back then, 1861, 1863 also. Riots over the draft occurred in other cities, including Detroit and Boston, but nowhere was as badly as in New York. Anti-war newspapers published attacks on the new draft law, fueling the mounting anger of white workers, leading up to the city's first draft lottery on July 11th, 1863. So the New York Draft Riot begins Monday morning, July 13th. For the first 24 hours after the lottery, the city remained suspiciously quiet. But rioting began early on the morning of Monday, July 13th. Thousands of white workers, mainly Irish and Irish Americans, mainly Irish and Irish Americans, started by attacking military and government buildings. They were attacking federal buildings, just like they attacked federal buildings January 6th. Just like they attacked a federal building January 6th, they did the same thing in 1863, July 1863. Thousands of white workers, mainly Irish and Irish Americans, started by attacking military and government buildings and became violent only toward people who tried to stop them at first, including the insufficient numbers of policemen and soldiers the city's leaders initially mustered to oppose them. You mean they were outnumbered like they were January 6th? They overran the police like they did January 6th? By that afternoon, however, they had moved on to target black citizens homes and businesses. In one notorious example, a mob of several thousand crazy ass people, some armed with clubs and bats, stormed the Colored Orphan Asylum on 5th Avenue near 42nd Street, a 4-story building housing more than 200 children. They took bedding, food, clothing, and other goods and set fire to the orphanage. Now, these are African-American children. Why would you do this? You gonna steal food from orphans? You gonna steal clothing from orphans? They set fire to the orphanage, but stopped short of assaulting the children, who were forced to go to one of the city's almshouses, okay, which is a house for the poor, okay, built by organizations or charitable people, things like this. Now, in addition, now the riots are going to cause violence and bloodshed. In addition to African Americans themselves, the rioters turned their rage against white abolitionists and women who were married to African American men. They turned their rage against white abolitionists and white women who were married to African American men. White dock workers working on the dock of the day, watching the tide roll away. White dock workers long opposed to African American men working on the docks alongside them. This is 1863. A demonstration against employers hiring black workers on the docks had turned violent earlier in 1863. White dock workers took the opportunity to destroy many of the businesses near the docks that catered to African American workers, and they attacked their owners of these businesses as part of their effort to erase the African American working class from the city. This is at the same time slavery is going on, the Civil War is going on. You're trying to erase the African American working class from the city. And this is a drawing of the burning of the orphanage as well. All right, now, by far the worst violence was reserved for African American men, a number of whom were lynched or beaten to death with shocking brutality. A number of these African American men were lynched or beaten to death with shocking brutality. In all, the published death toll of the New York City draft riots were 119 people, though estimates of the actual number of people killed reached as high as 1,200 people. Now, the draft riots ended because New York leaders struggled with the task of containing the draft. Governor Horatio Seymour, Seymour, was a peace Democrat, and the peace Democrats, or Copperheads, were opposed to reuniting the Union during the Civil War. And some of them appeared sympathetic to the rioters as well, and Governor Horatio Seymour appeared sympathetic to the rioters. New York City's Republican Governor George Opdyke wired the War Department to send federal troops, but hesitated on declaring martial law in response to the rioting. On July 15th, the third day of the protest, rioting spread to Brooklyn and Staten Island. The following day, the first of more than 4,000 federal troops arrived from New York regiments who had been fighting in the Battle of Gettysburg. After clashing with the rioters in what is now the Murray Hill neighborhood, the troops were finally able to restore order, and by midnight of July 16th, 1863, the New York City draft riots had come to an end. Now, the aftermath of and the legacy of the New York draft riots, in addition to the death toll, the riots had caused millions of dollars in property damage and made some 3,000 of the city's African American population homeless. Some 3,000 African Americans were homeless because of these stupid ass people, these insurrectionists. The New York Draft Riots remain the deadliest riots in U.S. history, even worse than the 1992 Los Angeles riots and the 1967 Detroit Rebellion. When the Colored Orphan Asylum attempted to rebuild on the same site after the riot,